All rise.
You may be seated. Continuing with the proceedings in the case of Disney, LucasFilm on trial for the murder of the Star Wars franchise. We're discussing today charge number 3. Mr. Ng, would you please read the charges?
Yes, Your Honor. All right. Charge number 3. The Film Threat jury, on behalf of the citizens of the Star Wars fandom, charges Lucasfilm Disney with the offense of negligent handling and management of the Star Wars franchise. On or about the 30th day of October 2012, Lucasfilm Disney did begin to negligently handle and manage the franchise by failing to create and implement a plan for the sequel trilogy. Failure to properly plan out the story for sequel trilogy resulted in a final trilogy that provided fans with an unsatisfying conclusion to the Skywalker storyline. This, coupled with the hiring of hack activist writers, the decanonization of the EU, and plagiarizing old plot points, caused the franchise to never attain the box office potential it could have had.
Just a reminder to those of you who are part of the jury, that includes every single viewer of this show right now. Court is now in session. Mr. Blackwood is joining us today as our court sketch artist. You can follow Todd Blackwood on his social media, which is Blackwood PDX. He is our court sketch artist for today. And now we will bring on, thank you, Mr. Blackwood, for all of your efforts. We appreciate it. Special Counsel Ng. That is a very pleasant shot of Ms. Kathleen Kennedy, Mr. Abrams, and others asleep behind the wheel, so it seems, in this illustration, if you are listening to this rather than watching on television or your mobile device. I will bring on members of the prosecution for today.
Your Honor, with all due respect, I just want to make a motion again that you instruct the jury to smash that like button and subscribe to the Film Threat YouTube channel.
I'm not sure if Mr. Ng is aware, this is a court of law. This isn't a job interview for a Red Lobster manager. And while I appreciate the effort, I'd like to see a little bit more courtroom decorum when it comes to your fashion, and perhaps the ill timing of the asking to like, share, and subscribe to the Film Threat YouTube channel. I will allow it. This one time. And let's get started, folks. For the prosecution, we have Mr. Connors. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Thomas Connors. I am a commentator and critic. I am here today to argue for the prosecution about the destruction of Star Wars on behalf of Disney and Lucasfilm.
Well, today, for these purposes, sir, you are an attorney.
All right.
You are a lawyer defending the pop culture arts. Also joining us on the prosecution team, thank you, Mr. Connors, for your attendance today. I appreciate it. Mr. Montgomery, please introduce yourself, sir.
Yes, my name is Shane Montgomery, Esquire, the Popcast, pop culture, everything honest, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir, for your attendance. Members of the defense returning from our first episode. Father Dave, thank you for joining us, Father Dave.
Good afternoon. My name is Father Dave. I'm an Orthodox priest, and I run a blog on old school role-playing games, and I come to this defense because of my love of Star Wars.
And I guess I should just call you Mr. Monkey King.
Works. Or Mr. Willie's fine.
Mr. Willie, I will call you Mr. Willie. Please don't read into that, members of the jury. Mr. Willie, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Willie, also known as Willie the Monkey King. I have two channels. One is an animation channel, and the other is a music channel where I compose music and share that.
Thank you. Thank you for your attendance today, Mr. Willie. I am, as is my right as the judge in this trial, I'm making a slight change to the proceedings to move things along quickly. The prosecution will present their case first in the charge of count number 3. After the prosecution's presentation, there will be time for the defense to cross-examine and ask questions of the prosecution. The same goes for the defense. The defense will then present their case, and there will be time for cross-examination, effectively questions from the opposite side. Is the prosecution ready? Who will be?
Your Honor.
Who will be present? Yes, yes,
Your
Mr.
Honor. I
Montgomery.
would like to submit evidence that is irrefutable by the defense and will prove without a shadow of a doubt that Lucasfilm Disney did in fact negligently handle and manage the Star Wars franchise. Your Honor, can I please present that evidence quickly?
Mr. Montgomery, you're getting a little ahead of the game here. You will have your chance. I just want to ask, so you'll be presenting first, and then Mr. Connors will follow you, and then we'll have cross-examination by the defense. Is that correct? You understand?
Yes, that sounds good.
All right, let's talk about count number 3. Mr. Montgomery, you have the floor. I will put you full screen.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, I actually have irrefutable evidence. I'd like to go ahead and share that right now with you guys if I could. It'll be very quick, actually. Let's see if it'll share here. Oh, there it goes.
Oops.
Okay, if you guys can all, this is irrefutable evidence I'd like to share with you guys. Just, here we go. Your Honor, I think that displays exactly what is completely wrong with what happened with Star Wars Disney. The fact that Luke Skywalker throws away his lightsaber should immediately, put Disney under... in fact, we should just go directly to the execution phase of the trial. Can we just, have them summarily executed, please?
We have more charges to discuss. While I understand the evidence you presented, which is a scene from the opening of The Last Jedi in which Jedi Master Skywalker throws his lightsaber over his shoulder. We're looking for a much more compelling argument here, sir. I'm sure we'd like to hear more
Yes.
of your argument.
Okay, so here's what I would say. And listen, I've got other witnesses. We're going to have today with us, we're going to have Luke Skywalker himself will be providing evidence, as well as the wife of George Lucas. But before we get to that, I just want to simply say that on October 30th, 2012, when Disney bought Star Wars for approximately $4.5 billion, Bob Iger was extraordinarily excited about this opportunity. Less than 4 months later, a plan was laid out. The problem is that Bob wanted his money back, and he wanted it back quickly. And he didn't take into consideration the fact that Disney, throughout time, has always taken approximately 3 years to produce each of its films. So if you go back to the original, Episode 4 was put out in 77, Empire 80, and Jedi in 83. And even the prequel series was done in 3-year increments. But Bob Iger wanted something else. He wanted Disney done quickly. And when he did that, he decided they were going to be put out every 2 years as opposed to every 3 so that they could get their money back even faster. And here's what Bob thought. He said, doesn't matter. The fans are going to show up no matter what we do. And when Kathleen Kennedy was brought on by George Lucas to head the franchise and to be the Kevin Feige, so to speak, of Star Wars, she did not have the experience nor the expertise to be able to do so, nor was she a fan of Star Wars in such a way that would allow her to put Star Wars first and the fans first. I would like to show you that as evidence here from Mark Hamill himself.
Please present your evidence.
Takes
Mr.
too long to
Montgomery.
share these screens. Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Take a look at what Mark Hamill himself had to say here with Rian Johnson, who is the defamed director of Episode 8.
Now, if I'm Mr. Montgomery, there's a icon in the lower right of that video image, which you could go full screen. That may help. There. Yeah, let's do that from now on. If we'll be this goes to everyone, please, that will be sharing evidence in this trial.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, because I have no clue as to what the hell I'm doing. So thank you very much. Here we go.
Can I just say, though, a lot of times I would say to Ryan, we got to think about the fans. And he said, no, we got to think about the story, and we got to think about our movie. Which
It's right there, Your Honor. You got to think about the fans. But Rian Johnson said, no, we have to make our movie. So that of course, is one of the biggest problems of Star Wars. But why did this happen? What happened? So when J.J. Abrams was in the process of destroying Episode 7, Rian Johnson was writing Episode 8. Did the two talk to each other? Perhaps, but it didn't really matter because Kathleen Kennedy told Rian Johnson that it was his movie and he needed to do with it what he wanted to do with it. As you see here, Mark Hamill describe and repeat. Rian Johnson was making his own movie. So if you go back to the fact that Bob Iger wanted it put out every 2 years, okay, now agreed, J.J. Abrams didn't do a very good job. Could 7, 8, and 9 have been good if he had control of all 3 movies? Well, for the sake of what we're talking about here today and the fact of the story having, the story being written properly, having the same director for all 3 movies obviously would have played into at least the story having more, and the story being more conclusive, connecting more, and making the fans a little happier. Not saying JJ would have done a better job, but because he only had 2 years, he did not take on Episode 8 because he simply couldn't do it. He's in the process of making 7, so Rian Johnson gets 8. So, but the problem here is, Your Honor, that nobody really understands Star Wars as they probably should. So what I'd like to do is provide more evidence. The person who is probably more responsible for the success of Star Wars than perhaps George Lucas himself, and that would be his ex-wife, Marcia Lucas. And I'd like you to hear her words on what she felt like Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams had done for Star Wars. And this sharing process takes too damn long. Okay.
You're doing fine, Mr. Montgomery. Please just present your evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. Here we go. person we should listen to is the person who is probably the most responsible for Star Wars success next to George Lucas, and that's his first wife, Marcia. The woman who is responsible for the good luck kiss, Obi-Wan Kenobi dying, and the trench run leading up to the destruction of the Death Star, among other things. Well, she had this to say about Star Wars following the release of Episode 8. "I like Kathleen. I always liked her. She was full of beans. She was really smart and really bright. Now that she is running Lucasfilm and making movies, it seems to me that Kathy and J.J. Abrams don't have a clue about making Star Wars. They don't get it. And J.J. Abrams is writing these stories. When I saw where they kill Han Solo, I was furious. Absolutely, positively, there was no rhyme or reason to it. I thought, you don't get the Jedi story. You don't get the magic of Star Wars. They killed Luke Skywalker and they don't have Princess Leia anymore. And they're spitting out movies every year. And they think it's important to appeal to a woman's audience. So now their main character is this female who's supposed to have Jedi powers, but we don't know how she got Jedi powers or who she is. It sucks. The storylines are terrible, awful. You can quote me, J.J. Abrams, Kathleen Kennedy, talk to me. Marcia didn't...
Your Honor, I think Marcia says it all there when she says, it sucks. And with that, I would like to rest my evidence.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Montgomery. Do you have any idea what, and I'm asking because I genuinely don't know, what does the phrase "she was full of beans" mean? She said that Kathleen Kennedy was full of beans. Beans, as we know, if you consume beans, one might expel gas. Was she saying she's full of gas? She's full of... I don't want to make an assumption. I'm just curious if I am not familiar with the term "full of beans," and I'm just curious if you have a interpretation of what she meant by that remark.
Yes, it is well known, actually, Your Honor, that Kathleen Kennedy is very gassy. And it is true, Your Honor, and yeah, I'll back that up.
Your Honor, I'll just add that according to the dictionary, full of beans refers to being not correct or truthful. Full of nonsense.
Oh, that too. Yes, excellent.
Interesting. Mr. Connors, are you prepared to continue the prosecution's case?
I am, and I would like to thank Mr. Montgomery for his wonderful argument there, because I believe he's made some very good points, especially along the lines of The Last Jedi, because it may be true that is where the actual murder occurred. It was a slow abuse to that moment, but the actual murder did occur under the reign of Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy. But I would like to take you back a little further, because my colleague today and many colleagues before me have pointed out that this was kind of built on faulty ground to begin with. You had a situation where, and I would like to present my first piece of evidence here, which is a piece from Esquire, where J.J. Abrams, the director and I believe co-writer of The Force Awakens and producer, had this to say about the situation in the Lucasfilm offices. He says, they didn't have a real plan when they made the new Star Wars trilogy. So this, I believe, is one of the most damning pieces of evidence you could have here, is that there was no plan. I mean, he admits it. The core leader of this initial plan admits it there. Now, of course, we've had Daisy Ridley and others, including Simon Pegg, claim that there was other plans. But regardless of those plans, as my colleague had pointed out so rightfully so, were put to rest, just like the soul of Star Wars with Mr. Rian Johnson. And I know some other arguments have been made before about, this was already dead, when it was clearly not dead, or Disney wouldn't have paid the money they have paid for it. If it was the case, that I believe so. And really, we have another problem here, and the legacy beyond the movies, right? What was the idea here that we had, and that was that you would want this seed to grow into a forest of Star Wars films. Well, what we've had here is a problem, and this problem is this revolving door, and you'll hear me bring up this revolving door quite a bit. because I myself have coined a term, or a saying, I should say, where I've said Kathleen Kennedy has fired more people than she's hired. And I know that may sound funny because it is meant to be a bit in jest, but at this point it's not inaccurate. And I give you also now the second piece of evidence I have here, and this is a long list.
Could you share screen, Mr. Connors, so that we can all share in your evidence?
Yeah. I am.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Connors.
Did I not share the last time too?
You didn't share the last one. We weren't able.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I did.
We can go back and we can look at that.
Well,
I'll allow it. I'll allow
all right,
it.
I'll reshare those real quick just so you all
fine.
in the audience
That's
can
fine.
see here. We have this would be the piece with Simon Pegg here.
Yeah, please share your last piece of evidence for our jury to examine.
I thought I had. That's my fault.
That's fine.
And then prior to that, we had. Whoops, that's the wrong way. Let me see here. Where did I put it now? Of course, now I lost the one. But yes, that was the Esquire piece, and then the Daisy Ridley piece as well. And then we have now my next piece of evidence, which will feed into more, is this laundry list. And I want to bring this up here. Because what we have here refers to what I mean when I said Kathleen Kennedy has fired more people than she's hired. And this is not even a complete list, folks, as you'll see when we get going here. We have the 2 completed projects, The Force Awakens and Last Jedi. These were completed by their original directors and creators. But other than that, none of the other projects under Lucasfilm and Disney have had any success. And I grant you this, I give you this evidence right here. We have Gareth Edwards, who was working on Rogue One. He was removed. Josh Trank was supposed to work on an earlier Boba Fett project. He was also removed. Lord and Miller were removed, and this is, and I insert this into evidence via the brother of the director, Ron Howard himself, that Lord and Miller had shot for 88 days on the project before they were removed. Now, for the court, for those in the jury who may not know, an average film, that is pretty much the time you need to shoot one. So that means they pretty much had almost shot this entire film when they brought in another director to completely reshoot the film. We also have Colin Trevorrow, who wrote Duel of the Fates and was meant to direct it. He also was let go when J.J. Abrams was brought back in to clean up the mess that Rian Johnson had created with The Last Jedi. Then we have Stephen Daldry, who was supposed to be working on an Obi-Wan project. He did not make that project. James Mangold, who is recently worked on Indiana Jones, was also attached to a Boba Fett project at one time. Benioff and Weiss of Game of Thrones fame also had a project that was canceled. Patty Jenkins of Wonder Woman fame also had a very high-profile project get canceled. J.D. Dillard has also had a film project canceled. Kevin Feige and Michael Waldron have now had a project canceled. Damon Lindelof and Josh Britt Gibson have been let go from the Rey project. And we also have since learned about David Gordon Green, who also had proposed a project that did not go forward at Disney as well. So Lord knows how many more victims there are behind the scenes of this huge injustice by Disney, where an entire generation of directors and creators have not been able to put their voice into one of the biggest pop culture franchises of all time. This is an injustice beyond any injustice before when it comes to this franchise, regardless of what damage George Lucas may or may not have inflicted prior to this. I don't think the denial can be made that this has gone nothing but in the wrong direction. And we brought up time and time again, the prosecution has brought up, and the defense for that matter, about this idea of the feminization of Star Wars, which is really hard to deny. It's become a problem. In fact, we even have high-profile papers like my next exhibit here. You have Business Insider bringing light to the fact that Bob Iger has a Star Wars problem at Disney. And this was already back in November of 2022. This has been an ongoing thing in all of the major trades when it comes to Star Wars. They have a problem. And that problem is a franchise that they killed. And that is where I rest my case, Your Honor.
As the prosecution is resting, the defense may now cross-examine. We will go to comments from our jury. We have some starred comments. We will get to those, I promise. Defense is now your opportunity to cross-examine and directly ask questions related to what you have just seen, and then you may present your case. Who would like to go first? Mr. Willie.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Montgomery, where's the proof that Kathleen Kennedy told Rian Johnson to make his own movie?
The proof is actually in several interviews. You even heard it from Rian Johnson there himself. So he said there that, he was encouraged to, we need to make the movie for ourselves. And in several interviews, Kathleen Kennedy has talked about how she gives all of her directors the power to do what they want to do. I'll have to go back and I can produce this as evidence later. The evidence that was used actually to make that video, which was made about a year ago, where she did provide evidence that she had encouraged Rian Johnson to make the movie his own and she's not wrong. I mean, when you think about it, all of the movies that she produced before, Kathleen Kennedy, prior to working on Disney, was a fantastic producer. She's attached to many great movies. What is it about those movies that were great? Well, they were independent franchises, independent movies. And she wasn't responsible for the creative guidance of those movies. And she is the Kevin Feige of Disney. And so she failed. And so that I can provide that evidence, though, for you, Your Honor, if you'd like that.
I also provide my other piece of evidence I did bring up earlier. I'll just present it here now, and that is that the whatever plan was in place with J.J. Abrams was thrown out the window, according to Daisy Ridley and Simon Pegg. If you want to share this Den of Geek article that I mentioned earlier that I didn't get a chance to show, and that clearly says there was an origin plan, and it got tossed out the window. Well, who tossed it out the window? Mr. Johnson. So I don't think if he wasn't given carte blanche, then that wouldn't be the case. At least that's my interpretation of it.
I concur.
Thank you, Mr.
In
Connors.
fact, I could back that up.
Mr. Ing?
Sorry,
Mr. Ing?
I can back that up with the interview. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. In the interview with Wired Magazine and J.J. Abrams, he states, and quote, Rian has asked for a couple of things here and there that he needs for his story. He is an incredibly accomplished filmmaker and an incredibly strong writer. So the story he told, what we were doing, and went in the direction that he felt was best. But that was very much in line with what we were thinking as well. Now, here's the important part. But you're right. That will be his movie. He's going to do it in the way he sees fit. He's neither asking for nor does he need me to oversee the process. And that's a direct quote from J.J. Abrams.
Thank you, sir.
Father Dave, did you have any questions for cross-examine?
I just want to confirm with Mr. Connors that he does admit the fact that the Star Wars franchise was not in the best place prior to the purchase of the franchise by Disney.
I did admit that it was not in the same place it was before, but I also did enter into evidence that the fact that it was sold to Disney for $4.05 billion and the fact that it was still a flourishing franchise. The Force Awakens was the highest grossing movie of all time is my next piece to argue that point. If it was a dead franchise, then I don't think that would have happened at that point.
I was asking if it was damaged.
Again, if it was damaged, I don't think that Disney would have paid $4.05 billion for it, or The Force Awakens would have been the highest grossing film until Avengers Endgame knocked it off that pedestal. That's my answer to that.
Any other questions from the defense for the prosecution in this cross-examination phase of the trial? Father Dave? Mr. Willie?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, let's briefly pivot. Mr. Blackwood, you are working tirelessly on sketches during this. I see you have drawn Mr. Connors as Mr. Connors as He-Man. Is that what that is? That well, then there you are. That Mr. Connors in well, there you know.
Fantastic.
We can't unsee that now. We can't
Very
unsee
accurate.
that now.
Looks good.
You will be I assume, Mr. Blackwood, you'll be posting all of these courtroom sketches on your Instagram at @Blackwood_PDX. You'll get to see all these sketches. Please continue to share those with us throughout the trial. That is a sketch of Mr. Luke Skywalker, Master Jedi Luke Skywalker, drinking blue breast milk.
Wonderful.
That's all
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I need a moment just for myself. After seeing this picture, it still affects me.
Doesn't all milk come from a breast?
Technically, all milk comes from a breast. And we're going to end that conversation there. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Yes, that's a very graphic representation of that scene. For those of you that are not watching and only listening, you may consider yourselves lucky.
I apologize, Your Honor. I've gotten my composure back.
Thank you, Mr. Connors. We're going to read some of the comments from those among the jury in the chat. We have a lot of comments, questions, and serious concerns from fans. And I want to thank them for their attendance today. Nearly 800 people watching live. I think it's 700 and Mr. Ng, what would that be? 760.
Well, 67 now, but I'm pretty sure you were referring to being 769.
Yes, we should.
Your Honor,
Hopefully, we'll reach that number at some point. Let me go to our comments and questions before we pivot then to the defense. And I just want to remind you, Amanda Nowicki has become a YouTube member. So I want to say, if you are a member of the Film Threat YouTube channel, you'll get access to our Discord, and you can continue the conversation in our Critics Court forum on the Film Threat Discord. So please become a member. It helps support the channel, and we appreciate it. You only need to join the channel for 1 month to get access to the Discord, and we appreciate that. Ken Bogus also became a member along with Shum. 200-watt studio for 5. I object. Prosecution used Mark Hamill as a witness. Then he needs to be here for cross-examination by the defense. I'm going to allow it as video being used as evidence. That's allowable in this courtroom. So it's allowable. It would be if someone would reach out to Mr. Hamill on Twitter, where he's very active on social media. We will do our best to get Mr. Hamill here as a witness. We have some incredible people that will be joining our courtroom in the coming weeks. We hope you continue to watch the proceedings in this trial. It would be my profound honor to have Mr. Hamill here as a witness. Thank you, 200-watt studio. Philip Trevor for 5. Your Honor, in Australia, the term full of beans is, I assume you mean slang, for full of energy or having real enthusiasm for a project or goal. We can only assume that's what Marshall Lucas meant. No Money G for 10 says, new Star Wars is an abomination. Let them burn. I would ask you, No Money G, that you please see all the evidence first before you come to such a strong opinion and conclusion. Please look at all the evidence before you reach your conclusion. I would just ask. Latino Slant said, panels, suits are everything. For 2. And Mr. Slant is a member. Thank you, Mr. Slant. Paulie from Latino Slant. Ministry of Wrongthink for $9.99 says, just a question for the benefit of the jury. Does this charge extend only to the movies themselves, or is all Disney Star Wars products / park attractions included? The charges, the main charge, and by the way, all the counts, all the charges are in a Google Doc, which you can read for yourself in the description of this episode of Critics Court. We are on episode 4 of Critics Court, but we are debating and arguing count 3. The main charge is that Disney Lucasfilm murdered the Star Wars franchise. That could include products, collectibles, toys, the movies, and park attractions. Thank you, Ministry of Wrong Thing. 200 Watt Studio for 5. Your Honor, could you please define the difference between mismanagement and negligence for the jury? I'm going to allow you to, those two could be, they're almost synonyms, mismanagement and negligence. I mean, negligence being more irresponsible, mismanagement, no accountability. I'm going to leave that open for interpretation from the jury.
If I may, Your Honor, I would say both.
Yes.
In this case, both can be proven. Yes.
Okay.
I believe the implication is at dispute is how Disney has managed Star Wars, their Star Wars intellectual property, and we are saying that they have mismanaged said property.
If I'm not mistaken, doesn't negligence imply a willful inaction versus mismanagement, which could just be human error?
In this case, I believe there is a case for both. Sorry, go ahead, Alan.
I'm just saying that negligence could be defined as incompetence as well.
All right. Let's continue with your comments before we switch to the defense. John Puma's also become a YouTube member. We appreciate that. Snakes and Funerals says RIP Star Wars. Thank you for being a member. Thunderduck. I pronounced that correctly, Thunderduck. Ian McDermott was surprised to play the Emperor again. J.J. Abrams said it was always the plan. As is greater than Tom, says Hank Scorpio, Globex Corp CEO. War Monkey says, I love the Ghoulie statue in the back as Tom is so serious today. I think Tom is always serious. Commander Cello, I love this trial. Good idea and hail. The Joker, thank you, Joker, for being here. The Galactic Star Cruiser failed. My understanding is...
Your Honor, if you don't mind...
Yes?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I have some Rumble chats as well, Rumble rants here. Toxic Avenger 3 says Disney used the Star Wars legacy like a box of color forms. There's also 26 people watching us on Rumble at the moment. And Toxic Avenger 3 also says R is for Rebellion and R is for Rumble.
Well, thank you, those of us watching on Rumble. We hope you continue to watch in the coming weeks. More chat comments and questions here. AJ Matheson for 5 says Sam Witwer makes the point on mishandling Luke. The guy who throws down his weapon in front of the Emperor does not think of killing his nephew. Perhaps something for the jury to consider. 200 Watt Studio for 2. Would it come down to intent? Up to interpretation. Nathan Cassidy for $9.99. I would present the evidence that at the time of the Disney purchase, Star Wars was the third biggest international franchise behind Pokemon and Hello Kitty. After the sequel trilogy, they reduced it to a CW show. Christopher Dominguez says Kathleen Kennedy is notoriously known for hiring directors only to fire them in the end. Kronos Godwisen says, release the Lord Miller cut. Don't know if it will be good, but it would have more integrity. Imperfect says, objection, court sketch artist is traumatizing the jury. And a final comment here, Max Relax for 22 euros. Thank you for this trial. The victims of Disney Star Wars, the audience, need this. And with that, we will pivot to the defense. Who would like to go first? Father Dave, Mr. Willie.
That would be me. Give me just a sec to try and set up
Mr. Willie, I will put you front and center on the screen. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you can share some more of your sketches today. Well, there you are. There you are. Mr. Willie, I'm putting you front and center now to present your evidence.
Hold on, I'm experiencing a bit of technical difficulties, so it's just gonna.
No, it's fine. It's no, it showed up.
I know it showed up, but my notes didn't show up.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna
I'll give you a moment to.
I'm just going to just put it out like this, if that's okay. If that pleases the court.
Can you share screen?
Yeah. Let me share screen again. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay. So according to Lucas, all of Star Wars was planned out. The original trilogy as well as the prequels. That is a lie. The prequels were planned out. However, I will prove that despite Lucasfilm's original plans following through for the sequel trilogy, it is a moot point since the original trilogy didn't have a plan, and that the great plot twists of the original trilogy were made to satisfy solving narrative problems. J.J. Abrams allegedly had the plan for the sequel trilogy, as even stated by the prosecution. I say allegedly because according to Daisy Ridley, in an interview on the Jimmy Kimmel show, there was a plan for her parentage in the sequel trilogy. Abrams also told Adam Driver for his plans for Kylo Ren story arc, as Driver said in an interview with Ian's Life. J.J. Abrams told me when I met him for the first time that I should imagine a journey of the character completely opposite of Darth Vader. So albeit a loose plan, the notion was there that so that the idea of them having no plan was false. However, it seemed Rian Johnson jettisoned these outlines to make a powerful yet divisive film in the franchise, The Last Jedi. It was a film that closed all the mystery boxes Abrams set up that built fan excitement. However, let's say having a loose plan is as bad as having a no plan. Then the Infinity Saga should be bad. Because in an interview with IGN, Joss Whedon stated that there was no plan for what to do with Thanos after his cameo. So maybe having no plan, maybe the fact that the Infinity Saga was so good, maybe that's a fluke. Or maybe not. Despite Lucas's claims that he had the original trilogy planned out, before the release of Star Wars back in '77, Lucas commissioned writer Alan Dean Foster to write a sequel novel in case Star Wars was a flop called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. In a link, I said in a link for the defense, a link to the Wikipedia page of Splinter of a Mind's Eye. And this is so you can see that behind the scenes information, such as the direction of the book being abandoned when Star Wars became a hit. But more so, it features the plot that depicts none of the characters that would be introduced in Empire, such as Lando, Yoda, or Boba Fett. So if Lucas really planned out the original trilogy like he said, there would be at least seeds of these characters within the book. The idea of Vader being Luke's father wasn't introduced until later. One of the biggest things that were planned in the twist, according to Lucas, was Vader being Luke's father, something that Lucas has gone on record saying that he planned since the original Star Wars. According to his ex-wife, who is Marcia Lucas, as we mentioned earlier, who had saved Star Wars in the editing bay and helped develop certain story ideas that became bedrocks of Star Wars. In the docu-series Icon Unearthed, as stated in the Inverse article, according to the Inverse article interviewing the director Brian Volk Weiss, George Lucas was struggling to come up with some kind of big twist for Empire's third act. While stuck, Marcia and Lucas invited screenwriters Willard Huck and Gloria Katz over for dinner. The couple had worked with Lucas before, including an uncredited rewrite of A New Hope. When Lucas described his struggles with the Empire story, Huck joked, "You can always make Darth Vader Luke's father." And this is also evidenced in the original screenwriter Lee Brackett, who wrote the first draft of Empire Strikes Back. there was no mention of Vader being Luke's father. In fact, if I can share another screen, in an article from Screen Rant, there is an excerpt from Brackett's original script where it says here, where it had Anakin mentioning that his twin sister, training Luke, with mentioning to Luke that he had a twin sister, not Leia, and Anakin explaining that he told Obi-Wan not to reveal his sibling for fear that Vader would use her as a hostage. And here's the depiction as well. Anakin, you've grown up well, Luke. I'm proud of you. Did your uncle ever speak to you about your sister? Luke, my sister? I have a sister? But why didn't Uncle Owen? Anakin, it was my request. When I saw the Empire closing in, I sent you both away for your own safety, far apart from each other. Luke, where is she? What's her name? Anakin, if I were to tell you, Darth Vader would get that information from your mind and use her as a hostage. Not yet, Luke. When it's time, Luke, you will take from me the oath of a Jedi Knight. And for my... Oops. Share my screen. And for my last bit of evidence is that Leia being Luke's sister was added later. Originally, Luke's sister was to be identified later, but Lucas changed his mind. In an anecdote, in the annotated notes of the script, Luke Skywalker made Luke and Leia's siblings out of a creative purpose, as stated in the annotated screenplays. In the end, I had a knowledge in the fight between Luke and his father of why Luke makes the final turn to the bad side of the Force and tries to kill his father. Director Richard Marquand was trying to block out the fight between Luke and Vader, and we got down to the point underneath the throne room there, and he said, the script sort of says that Vader says something that upsets Luke, or something vague like that. And we didn't have the actual moment that we needed where you got the sense that Luke is hiding. He's not going to fight him. He'd rather die first, and then something turns him and makes him fight. And in the process of evolving the script and evolving the importance of Leia as his sister, it'd be sitting right there in front of my face, and became obvious that turning her to the dark side would be the thing that sends Luke off. So my point being, let me go back to this page. So does Lucas not having the original trilogy plan out change the quality of these films? I'd say no. Does it make Luke a liar? Does it make Lucas a liar? That's not what this argument is about. However, it is for the best that the original trilogy wasn't planned out. Look at the divisive prequels as evidence of that. To quote the commenter Joseph Reinman from Kiara, you need to understand that the original trilogy wasn't envisioned to be a trilogy. They made one movie they were sure was going to flop, then kept their fingers crossed that they'd get another one. When the movie turned out to be a hit, they got to do Empire and planned to keep going for at least 3 to 5 more films, depending on how things turned out. Maybe what was part of the success of the original trilogy was that there were no guarantees that there would be another one. So they tried to tell the best story they could. Regardless, the idea of the sequel trilogy is somehow lacking because they didn't have an overreaching plan is moot. The best trilogy didn't need one.
Hey, Your Honor, I need to object on the relevance here. Willie, all due respect, can you offer the relevance of this testimony, please, sir?
I would also like to object to the admission of anything from Lee Brackett's Star Wars script, because Anakin was not named in that script.
Mr. Willie, your response? The jury is listening.
Sure, absolutely. So the point I'm making is that the fact that the sequel trilogy didn't have a plan it's moot point because the original trilogy didn't have one. Now, the fact of the sequel trilogy being good or bad, that's a matter up to the audience for taste. because as you can see, both trilogies, they have their fans.
If I may, this goes to the idea of mismanagement and negligence.
Exactly.
Because if the Star Wars original trilogy could go off and be the creative and financial success that it was without a plan, basically making stuff up as we go, then we can't call that very same style of filmmaking with what Disney did with the sequel trilogy negligence or mismanagement. That's the point.
Well, I would argue that, as the creator of a product, so as George Lucas is the creator of Star Wars, and as he's creating the original trilogy, which we got to remember is we don't have a franchise yet until he starts telling the story. So once he creates his trilogy, no matter how many times he's changed it or whether it's planned out or not, once the creator has turned over the product to other creatives, it's paramount that those creatives, as we've seen in IPs like Star Trek, it's critical that the canon or that the story that is followed, the respect of what's happened before is followed. And would it still be Star Wars if somebody just decided to say, well, I'm going to do what George did and I'm going to make it whatever I want it to be?
Well, you get from reading the synopsis of the plot from Splinter of the Mind's Eye that he did allow people to go their own way for telling the story, and he actually just rejected the entire book.
So are you basically then saying that as the creator, he has the right to say what is canon and not canon at his will at that point, whether something has come out into the public eye? That's his prerogative as the creator, and I think that's what my colleague was arguing in his point, but I don't know if we were ready for a rebuttal on their argument yet, so I have no questions at this point.
Let's move on to Father Dave and comments you'll say before we take a brief recess, and then we will have open debate, as well as comments from our jury. And I want to thank the over 800 members of our jury. Normally, the limit is 12. There's no limit on Critics Court. Father Dave, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to remind the jury of the actual count against Lucasfilm and Disney. And that is they begin to negligently handle and manage the franchise. And some of the reasons pointed to by the actual charge are hiring hack activist writers, the decanonization of the EU, and the plagiarization of old plot points, causing the franchise to never attain the box office potential it could have had. Now, as the prosecution pointed out, Episode 7 had a box office of $2 billion. That's not mismanagement, and that's not negligence from a business point of view. And in terms of the decanonization of the EU, you just made the argument that the creator has the ability to determine what is and what isn't canon. But regardless, this may be unpopular because I know there's a lot of people out there who like the EU. I'm not one of them. I was actually quite pleased that Disney made the business decision to clear up the canonical gray area that was the EU, because there are a lot of stories there that George had put a stamp of approval on, but he reserved the right, as he did with that book that came out after Star Wars, to change his mind. And so therefore, while technically canonical, there were also technically not canonical if George had to say so. So in order to free up any confusion, because there's a lot of Star Wars books, Disney made the business decision to say, okay, we're not going to consider the EU canonical just so that we can move forward in a way that will get people a new Star Wars movie as fast as possible. And so that was a business decision that was made. didn't prevent them from going back and using stuff from the EU. It just cleared the way to make the picture clear. This is not canonical. Disney Star Wars is going to do something new and hopefully fun. And as far as plagiarizing old plot points, I made the case in episode 2 that the format of storytelling that George started with Star Wars and continued with the prequels, there are certain plot points, certain leitmotifs that happen in generational stories. And he had those same plot points in the prequels as he did with the original trilogy. The fact that J.J. Abrams chose to do something similar with his movie that made $2 billion is, again, not negligence. It's not mismanagement. And while many of us may be disappointed with what Disney has ultimately done with Star Wars, we may not like the finished product. We may not be happy with the way that this trilogy ended up. It's you still haven't really shown that this is negligence. You really haven't shown that this is mismanagement. This trilogy made a lot of money. Yes, some of us don't particularly care for it, but mismanagement and negligence are not things I think you can accuse Disney of. I rest.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Father Dave. Mr. Blackwood, I see that you seem to be drawing, it looks like Mickey Mouse. I'm not sure exactly what you've been working on here. I see Jabba the, I see sorry, Ms. Catherine Kennedy. All right, I'm going to object to myself making a bad joke. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Your efforts are much appreciated here on Critics Court. I hope that our jury appreciates these wonderful drawings that you're providing for us today. We're going to take a brief recess of just a few minutes. Yes,
Your Honor. I know you want to take a break, but the prosecution still has a right to cross-examine the.
Oh yes, thank you, Special Counsel Allening. Yes, cross-examination from the prosecution on everything we've just heard, and then we will move to a break. Thank you, Mr. Ng.
Excellent. So we just jump in?
Do you want me to go first, Shane? Or
Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Connors?
Actually, I got to go first last time. Let's let Tom go first, and I'll try to clean him up.
Mr. Connors.
All right. Mr. Willie, can I call you that, or should I call you that?
Yes. Fine.
Mr. Willie, compared the loose plan to the Marvel Universe, and Thanos' role in the Marvel Universe, which I'm not so sure is a fair comparable assessment to an entire franchise to one storyline, because I'm curious as to why you think we should draw that comparison here, and at the end of the day, why is that relevant, I guess, is my best question.
I would argue the relevance. Oh, well, okay. Let me tackle the first part of your question. Is why I decided to use that part of my argument. Is the fact is that Marvel itself has been considered this generation's version of Star Wars, and even then, with their established characters, there was still a level of letting the filmmakers create and play in the sandbox of Marvel, and even alter characters. For example, like Thanos, in his comic iteration, his motivation is far different than the one that was portrayed in Infinity War. My point is that even though Feige claims to have everything organized out, there is still, it's loosely organized. According to Whedon, it was loosely organized out, and there was an allowance of leadway for the filmmakers to create. The reason I compare that with the sequel trilogy is that, look, let's say, for example, of what Mr. Montgomery pointed out, that KK told Bryan Johnson to make his own film. He was allowed to do. She gave him the leadway to allow him to create his own film. Now, is the fact that it's a divisive film, that's a different debate than the fact that's different from malfeasance on Disney Lucasfilm's aspect.
Okay. I guess I'm failing to see your point here. Maybe I should ask you this a different way. On the whole point of your comparison to, George not having a plan for the original trilogy, leading into the prequel trilogy, which you kind of tried to connect with that, and bringing up books and other media. I got to ask you, do you like listening to the radio in your car?
Yes.
Now, you do know that the first cars that were invented didn't have radio, right?
Yes.
And those came along later in different, what would you consider like drafts of a vehicle, right? And every day or every year we get new drafts of these vehicles, and some things work, some things don't work. And over time, they excise the things that don't work, and we keep the things that work, and that's how we got to modern vehicles, right?
Correct.
So yeah, and in that, they built on those things that were pre-established. And of course, like I said, that original vehicle didn't have a radio. I'm sure it didn't have air conditioning or windshield wipers as well.
Neither seatbelts.
Exactly. But eventually they did. At this point now, I guess my question to you is, why do you think that the inventor of the car should be brought up or responsible for anything that the individual who created the windshield wiper would do? Like if a windshield wiper were to kill somebody, why would the inventor of the car be responsible for that? Wouldn't you think that the manufacturer of the windshield wiper would be instead?
Well, what I would argue with that is that while Mr. Ford invented the car, after a while, his invention, his creation, was allowed to permutate, and so we got different types of vehicles, like motorcycles, like seatbelts in cars, radios, etc. So my point is the fact is that it's Disney is the creator of the sequel trilogy. They are now the owners of Star Wars. It's no longer George Lucas. Just like how after the patent ran out for the car was no longer owned by Henry Ford. So
okay, I guess here's the thing though, is once the windshield wiper worked, they didn't really change it too much over time, right? They kept it the same. They moved on to other things, right? So I guess I'm just failing to see why the inventor of the car, or in this case, the inventor of the franchise, George Lucas, seems to be the defense wants to put him on trial when it's his creation that was killed. So I guess I'm failing to understand where the argument is coming in here, and a lot of your basis for your argument. Sorry about that, but
No.
I'll turn it over to Shane at that point. Thank you.
No, you're fine. I would argue is the fact that the sequel, that Star Wars is not dead, per se. And also I would argue is the fact is that it is, why should we hold Disney to a different standard than we would for George Lucas, who also was working on that sequel trilogy.
Willie, if you don't mind, I think the analogy to the car needs to be expanded, because the car is something that the end user can actually manipulate and use the way they want to use it. And This is akin to the idea of a fandom. The movie franchise has no life unless it has a fandom. And the car has no life, has no commercial value unless there's an end user, and that end user is willing to do things with the car. And so at the end of the day, the fact that we're even having this trial, at the end of the day, that there are fact that the people like myself who are not particularly happy with the products that Disney has produced over the last 10, 15 years, are willing to sit here and have this discussion in hopes that we get a better Star Wars is proof positive that Star Wars isn't dead. And again, the whole automobile thing really kind of fails as an analogy, again, because the end user there's all kinds of people that are not car manufacturers that actually do stuff for cars. I have windshield wipers, for example, that have been improved upon since the first windshield wiper, specifically to be able to wipe away water in a much more efficient way. And that particular company has nothing to do with the company that produced my car. So it's not a really good analogy to use.
Well, let's use your analogy, Father, if I can, and thank you for that's. I love that you say you want Star Wars to be alive. We all do. We want it to continue, and I'd like to thank my esteemed colleague, Mr. Connors. I would like to quickly refute some of your evidence that you came with, Father, when you talked about the box office results being. I would counter that the box office is an indication of the mismanagement of the franchise. When you consider that the domestic box office for episode 7 was $936 million, and then when episode 8 came, it dropped by a third. And then when episode 9 came, it dropped by, I would say 40% from the first movie. The continued dropping of the box office was an indication that fans also felt that Star Wars had mishandled the Disney franchise. And Your Honor, I leave it with that.
We're going to take a brief recess, and then we will open up the floor to open debate. We will also be bringing questions from those in the jury. So please don't leave the channel. I recommend that you grab a refreshing beverage, use the facilities, and we will be back in 2 minutes. And I want to please remind those in the jury to listen to all the evidence from both sides before coming to a conclusion. So please take the time now to take care of any personal business.
What I was trying to do is stay independent so I could make the movies I wanted to make. But at the same time, I was sort of fighting the corporate system, which I didn't like, and I'm not happy with the fact that corporations have taken over the film industry. But now I found myself being the head of a corporation. So there's a certain irony there, is that I have become the very thing that I was trying to avoid, which is basically what part of Star Wars is about. That is Darth Vader. He becomes the very thing that he's trying to protect himself against.
If I feel like Star Wars is very patriarchal, and clothes make the man toxic. Yes. Just because you're a stormtrooper in the Empire doesn't mean you can't look fabulous. The first order of business must be uniform, and uniform doesn't mean it all needs to look the same. Accessorize. Long live the matriarchy.
Hi, I'm Luke Toothbrusher.
Gosh, Luke.
Brush twice every day, and even if you enter a danger zone, Signal's fluoride keeps on protecting.
As a toy seller, Star Wars is unequaled.
My
have about 20, 25, you know.
Which ones?
You know, the main characters like Chewbacca, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, all of those, you know.
How many of the Star Wars characters do you have at home?
About 10.
About 10. How about you? Do you have them too?
I have 3. I don't have none, really.
You don't have any yet?
I'm planning to get some.
You are? Which ones you want?
All of them.
Star Wars toys have been the top sellers in boys' action toys for 6 years straight.
Some of the toys are action toys. If your child gets one, you may have to take it away with force.
Don't move.
I beg your pardon?
Don't move.
Don't move. You're going to hit me with the...
I cut your hand off.
Children are buying the toys, of course, but so are older investors. They're buying Star Wars toys.
Right. In a couple of years, they'll be worth a lot of dough. Like a lot of other things.
You're buying them strictly as an investment?
Yes, definitely.
All right, the brief recess is over. It looks like Mr. Connors and Mr. Willie are still taking care of personal business. Perhaps they're grabbing a beverage as we...
I'm here, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Connors. Mr. Willie, I'm sure will join us shortly. We'll use this opportunity to read some of our chat comments and questions from the jury, and we will move to open debate. Here we go. 200-watt studio says, general question, Your Honor, will there be oral victim impact statements allowed at the end of the evidentiary stage of the trial? Yeah, so we have others have asked about that, and it appears we will allow members of the Film Threat YouTube channel who are also members of the jury to actually come on a stream in the future to talk about how the alleged failure of Disney Lucasfilm has affected them. So yes, that we have actually added that to our plan. Mexican Iron Man for $9.99 says, upon the court rendering a guilty verdict, then Mexican Iron Bailiff is prepared to take Lucasfilm into custody and place Kathleen Kennedy in solitary confinement. I would not rush to judgment on that, Mr. Iron Man. Again, I would urge the jury to look at all the evidence before rushing to judgment. Hayden, 75 for 5. I think bringing up the box office for 7 and 8 is irrelevant. This was at a time people were still holding hope Star Wars could be good. Jeffrey Hallam for $4.99. Canon is the rules of the universe. Once you abandon canon, you abandon the story of the universe. You have stopped telling the story. Peter Garamby for 11 Canadian dollars. Question, would continuing the project under production at Lucasfilm, the Clone Wars series and the 1313 game, buy enough time for Disney Lucasfilm to come up with a more comprehensive plan? Dieter Bastian for €5. Judge Gore, will a Swedish company be on trial too for shameless product placement with chairs in a spacecraft not suited for that kind of seating? I assume you are referring to IKEA chairs.
Yeah.
That I assume you're talking about IKEA chairs. I am taking that into consideration, and thank you, Dieter Bastian, for your comment.
By the way, that is negligent.
Yes, well, we see that Mr. Blackwood has those chairs on full display. And there it is. There is an IKEA chair. GJJ for 5. Has any Star Wars theatrical release made money since Episode 9? Any question mark? Good question to ask. Mexican
There hasn't
Iron...
been one since Episode 9.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a fact that both the prosecution and the defense can agree to. Mexican Iron Man for $9.99. George Lucas gave us a vintage '69 Mustang Disney and Kathleen Kennedy ruined that car. They took that Mustang, put spinners and a lift kit on it, then spray painted an Aztec princess and volcano on the hood. Guilty. Trader Chris for $4.99 says all the money made from the movies are gone now with the bleeding from a failed hotel, theme park, and failed projects. Disney is losing money. Dieter Bastian goes on to say the in-between videos are great, always new and fresh. Retro Nerd Girl, who very honored to have Retro Nerd Girl as part of our jury. She has a very respectable YouTube channel. George didn't plan and got lucky. Disney didn't plan and failed critically. Retro Nerd Girl, open invitation to appear on Critics Court, no matter where you stand. Cyber Skull Media says this may be the strongest combined defense yet this week versus one person carrying the prosecution. Again, Cyber Skull Media, please be respectful in my courtroom. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, for your sketches. Again, visit Mr. Blackwood's Instagram page at Blackwood_PDX for all the sketches from today's trial and previous sessions, court sessions. We are now going to resume open debate. We have been a bit formal on the rules for open debate. Those rules are out the window. I would like to see some passionate debate. I want to see people who can handle the truth. And a quick comment here, Yumi in the movies, Galactic Star Cruiser and Galaxy's Edge, both being themed after the new trilogy and not the original trilogy, is all the evidence you need for negligence. Perhaps a comment to keep in mind. It is now open debate on count three and count three and actually any count in the trial. Open debate, which will go for the next 30 to 40 minutes. Anyone who would like to begin?
I actually would like to begin for the defense. I have a question for you. I have 3 strikes, and I believe this is the reason why count 3 100% is proven here. Bob Iger's choice to create an impossible release schedule is the first strike. Every 2 years putting out a Star Wars movie, it just doesn't work. You need 3 years. Strike number 2 is Kathleen Kennedy not hiring a Star Wars expert to help advise and guide her team. And of course, strike 3 was not having a unifying vision that would properly tell the story in a way that respects the first 6 movies that came before it.
I would. Sorry.
No need to apologize, Mr. Willie. Jump right in.
I would argue
all formal decorum. This is open debate.
Okay, I would argue for your counts as such. Number 1, with the release schedule, Marvel was able to release at the time when they bought LucasFilm 2 movies a year, and were able to make money. So the fact that they did every other year, it was something doable. Number 3, they did have an expert in Star Wars. They had, now love him or hate him, Pablo Hidalgo wrote wrote books on the dictionary of Star Wars, or on the lore of Star Wars. Huh? Pardon?
Yeah, the show Bible, is that what you're talking about?
No. He wrote books.
No,
he wrote books like of the Dictionary of Star Wars, or and I think he wrote another one about the lore of Star Wars. So, in theory, they did have experts of Star Wars.
Well, Kevin Feige was an expert on Marvel, right, and also a fan of the product. So the reason they could get out multiple films in such a quick amount of time was that he was managing it from the front. Hidalgo wasn't an upfront person managing this. Wasn't Kathleen Kennedy's right-hand man. There was no person to give guidance to make this thing go quicker. They're also working on a franchise that hasn't been produced in a very long time, that needs extraordinarily amount of time instead of a superhero franchise. So I would just say that not having a second, a person like a Kevin Feige to do that would make it impossible for them to do it every 2 years. J.J. Abrams also did both of the Star Trek movies before handing over the third one. You know, so the fact that he handed over the second one, I think, is an indication that he didn't have enough time to do 2 movies. If he's doing 7, there's not enough time to do 8 because it has to be written, it has to be prepared, and he's still producing 7. So I just think that makes it an impossibility.
And not only that, to my colleague's point, when you're already producing a film before the last one has come out, you have no idea what kind of feedback you're going to get on it. Granted, they got very positive feedback from The Force Awakens. So I don't know if they would have went down the road of allowing Rian Johnson to deviate so much had that been the case. And by the time we get to episode 9, the box office had dwindled so much and so bad that we have not had a movie since then. That was a point that was made just recently in our super chat session here. So yeah, I'm curious as to your guys' response to that, because and comparing it to the Marvel Universe, I don't know if you really want to keep going with that, because what happened to the Marvel Universe after a little while? It crushed under the weight of itself. And here we are now at a point where the Marvel Universe is on the brink of in the same place that Star Wars did it, but in half the time.
Well, I would like to make a meta argument that is not necessarily specific to Count 3, but is specific to the whole idea of Star Wars being dead. And one of the things that I hope that people come away from this trial, whether this ends up finding Disney guilty or not, is we need to understand that there is this idea called Star Wars. And that idea called Star Wars is not something that is wholly owned by Disney. Yes, they have the legal right to produce products that have Star Wars stamped on it, okay? But they don't have the power to tell us what is and isn't Star Wars. That's the fandom. And if we walk away from this trial, any way, shape, or form, feeling that we are beholden to Star Wars, to Disney for anything Star Wars, whether it's another movie, it's another game, it's another book, whatever, then Disney wins. Because they are the ones that want us to believe that they control everything Star Wars. And I want everyone to understand that the reason that I'm on the defense is because I'm here to defend the fandom and defend our ability to keep this franchise alive, regardless of what Disney ultimately does. And I want to point to previous franchises that live on despite the fact that their IPs have been in bad places. Star Trek got a movie franchise because of the fandom. Firefly got a movie because of the fandom. Star Wars exists because of the fandom. And as long as we, as the fandom, continue to hold the flame, continue to tell whoever owns the IP, whether it's Disney or somebody else, that we want good Star Wars stories and that we will pay good money for Star Wars stories, then Star Wars lives. And regardless of what Disney does, as long as we do our part in this thing that's known as Star Wars, and part of that is what we're doing here.
Well, I love the defense's positivity and outlook on this. And, that's great. I mean, but at the end of the day, business is business and life is and death are what we're arguing here. And you can buy something, you can take it, and it is yours at that point. And Disney had that right to do whatever they wanted with it. And what they did with it is murder it, sadly. And that's the argument we have here. Because if there was a future for the franchise, it was dead with them.
Okay. And art, as I've made the argument before, art is not something that exists in a vacuum. Art exists because it has an audience. And the way that that audience interacts with the art is determinative of what happens to that art. Okay?
And I'm not going to argue about art because that's obviously in the eye of the beholder. But I will say that I will give you credit earlier for saying that
and the beholder is the audience.
Yeah, and I will say this:
ultimately going to decide whether or not Star Wars dies.
And I totally agree with you, and I'll give you that point. And I will also agree earlier that maybe my car analogy wasn't the greatest, but I think there's a point that needs to be made here with that windshield wiper. What that windshield wiper was an improvement on the vehicle. It wasn't something that took away from it. It wasn't something that destroyed the car. Disney had every opportunity in the world to improve Star Wars, to build upon what was there, regardless of what state it was in at that time. Instead of building upon and nurturing it, it decided to malnourish it, bleed the blood dry, and leave it to die a riddled, dead mess, where today a Star Wars show or movie cannot even muster enough energy to get people excited on Disney Plus. And we are sadly at this point where they're just basically cutting pieces off the corpse and selling it to us.
I would like a court graphic of Tom's last statement there, Mr. Connor's last statement, please. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. There you go.
That's pretty close.
Great,
thank you, Mr. Blackwood.
I must be seeing that in my nightmares now.
So I also want to make the point that, you know, if in fact we do decide that Disney is indeed guilty of all of these charges, at the end of the day, does that really do anybody any good? The point that we as the fandom have to make to whoever owns the IPs of our beloved franchises is that these franchises exist because we made them exist. We were the ones who spent that money, or the ones who gave them the money in order to make these things real. And we need to be clear as a fandom to whoever owns these IPs that we demand better. And so again, that's on us. That's not on Disney.
Well, the good news is, Father Tom, I do believe, I love what you're saying because I feel the exact same way about Star Trek. But the reality is that, you know, the fandom does feel the way it does because the fact that they have failed to, you know, they've mishandled the franchise. If they hadn't mishandled the franchise, you wouldn't be having open court critics like we have here. We wouldn't have so much criticism. We would have more people at the box office. We would have more Disney movies. The reality is that we don't have these things because they have failed. And it is important that us as a fandom that we use. And I think you've actually done the best job of helping the prosecution today, sir. I believe you've said that we need to, as a fandom, to speak up and to, you know, be true to what we believe and what we love, and we need to use our dollars and our voices and to show them what we like and what we don't like, and show up to the things that are good and don't show up to the things that aren't. And until Disney can do that, then Disney has failed.
But failure and negligence are two different things.
Well, and I think another thing to your point, sir, if I can add this to the evidence, not to get too formal again, but it was brought up by in the audience that Star Wars used to be the third highest grossing franchise of all times when it comes to these kind of IPs. Now, this recently came out, and it has been bumped down to 4. And this is when they've had more movies and toys than they've ever had in the history of ever. So if there really was a fandom there to support it, they're not there anymore, I don't think. I don't know if you can add that to the screen there. Alan or not. There you go. As you see here, this is a recent release here from Title Max. And yeah, Star Wars is down there at 4th place. And it went from 3rd to 4th, and that's when it had more things added to the franchise, which should make it go up, and it did not, sadly. To where Winnie the Pooh, which has had very little to nothing come out in the last 10 to 20 years, is still down, still over top of it. That's pretty bad. And Mickey Mouse as well has overtaken it.
Just to be clear, being the 4th top.
No, it's 5th, but
4th, top grossing franchise in the world is dead. Just to be clear.
Unfortunately, I think I know where you're coming from with your argument, but the fact that it was at that place before Star Wars was taken over by Disney, and the fact that it has now been demoted when there's actually more movies, more shows, more merchandise than there ever has been before, I think that's all the proof you need that this franchise is dead. And Star Wars killed
and
it.
mishandled. And
mishandled. And it was died due to mismanagement and negligence at the same time. You had several parties that went out of their way to do their own thing and were selfish. And you had other parties maybe out of negligence or trying to appease others with no real malice. I will concede that, but that does not change the facts that, as you've pointed out, a franchise with a legacy that goes through generations has basically been killed in less time than it's been around. It's just insane.
Well, there are ups and downs in every IP and every franchise, and there are other franchises that have survived pretty horrible runs. I would give you Godzilla, for example. Godzilla is one of my favorite IPs, and there was a run there where the movies that got produced were really bad, but it's still around today. It's still producing really good movies, really fun movies.
And I would counter with that when we had the 98 Godzilla. What did Toho do? They turned around and counterbalanced it with their own franchise to reinvigorate it again because they saw the damage that was inflicted. Disney didn't do that. When they saw the damage that was inflicted, they continued to bludgeon it to death instead of try to revive it.
So this brings up an interesting point, and that is that this is something that comes I bring to this particular court experience from the RPG world, which is a little bit different than the movie world, but nonetheless I think is analogous. One of the games that I play is Dungeons and Dragons, but it's not Dungeons and Dragons, because there's these things in the world called retro clones, which emulate Dungeons and Dragons from 1977, 1981, 1984, etc. And these are made by fans for fans, and they keep the game alive. Okay. And when it comes to things like Star Trek, there are plenty of media out there that have made things that are Star Trek but aren't Star Trek. The Orville and Galaxy Quest are Star Trek shows and movies, but they're not Star Trek. We, as the fandom and as creators and creatives, can do the same thing with Star Wars. There are plenty of things about Star Wars that are universal that we can, show and demonstrate that that's Star Wars, even though legally it's not. And if we can do that and do it in such a way that makes Hollywood say, there's money to be made there, we can change the game. And in fact, that has recently happened in the RPG world, where Wizards of the Coast has been put in a very uncomfortable position because fans, due to what they're doing with that product and making their own stuff and making lots of money with it, have forced Wizards of the Coast to try to change the game. And it's going to be a really interesting ride in the next several years to see what happens. We, as the fandom, need to do the same thing. And that's not due to, and in large part, this kind of falls on us, not Disney, because we need to be better stewards. We need to be more careful with our money, more judicious with our money.
And that's admirable. And if I get a dog that looks just like my old dog, I can love it just as much as my old dog, but it still doesn't make it my old dog. And fans can make new things all day long. That still doesn't make it Star Wars. And I'd love to hear more from Willie or my colleague here on this as well.
I would say is that part of the problem with the case when you're arguing negligence or malfeasance is that you, in order to definitively prove it, you have to have the financials, and unfortunately we are not privy to those financials of Lucasfilm. So I mean, it's kind of a hard case to make without that. So I mean, we're just kind of fumbling around with mainly emotional arguments.
Well, what we do have proof, though, that they intentionally went against George Lucas's intended vision for the sequel trilogy. We do know that it was their intent to shift it towards a female-oriented saga instead of it being inclusive of everybody, or basically in line with the more classic form of the franchise. And, you know, I mean, Kathleen Kennedy herself has said that we're not here to appease to 50-year-old fans. And I think that was the point where they intentionally, what it may be second-degree murder or however you want to put it, it sure ain't homicide, it's murder. They intended to do something here that changed Star Wars as a whole, and it did not work out for them in the end. That does not mean they didn't kill it. That's what happened at the end of the day.
I would argue. Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
I would to speak to the idea that introducing, you know, the idea of the Force is female. I agree, it's a bad idea, but it's also an idea that for many years was making money. Outrage marketing is a thing, and it works. The Colin Kaepernick thing with Nike increased their sales by 31%, and they made $6 billion by creating controversy. So the idea that the Disney is willing to stir controversy as a PR move to try to make money on their new franchise quickly is not negligence. It's a business strategy. One that I disagree with, one that I don't think worked, but it is a business strategy.
Well, if they had at least pulled it off. So I mean, if they wanted the Force to be female, that's fine. But the problem is they turned Rey into a Mary Sue, and you cannot have a character who can come in and just do everything that your legacy characters could do without having any knowledge or study or expertise, and just can magically do these things. And I think anyone would agree that, with their head screwed on straight, that's just a stupid thing to do. I mean, we're talking about mishandling the franchise. I mean, for the love of God, anybody who watched that movie the first time through and stopped and looked and went, how the hell did all that happen? I've been watching Star Wars for how many decades? How the hell did that happen? And why isn't there someone there to say, hey guys, why are we doing this? This doesn't make any sense. How does Rey automatically know how to use the Force once she meets Kylo Ren? How does she immediately duplicate all the things that he can do after years of studying and meditating and practicing? I mean, it's just, they mishandled the franchise because they thought that fans would show up no matter what. It's the same problem we have in Hollywood now with most of our IPs. They just believe with a lot of these franchises that people are going to show up anyways. So they're going to continue to slowly push the peg towards a greater audience. The reason why the Force is female is because half of the population is female. And they know that the majority of the excited people about Star Wars are male. And so they already said, hey, we already got those assholes. We already got them. So let's go ahead and just now we're going to go get the ladies. Okay, that's what we're going to do. And that's exactly what they did. And they failed, and it was mishandled because it turned out to be shitty Star Wars.
I just saw in the chat a comment about Finn and how the fans wanted Finn to be the new hero. Another business decision that Disney made, and again, one that at the time was a good one, was that Hollywood was making bank in China. And one of the things that China does not like is, unfortunately, people with darker color skin. And so, as we saw with those posters, Disney made the business decision to de-emphasize Finn. And so, in order to placate to an audience that they thought they were going to make billions of dollars from, they made certain choices. Are those negligent choices or just bad choices? Again, all of this comes down to business. And at the time, Hollywood was courting China. And so there were certain business decisions that needed to be made. Is that neglect? Is that mismanagement? Or is it just bad decisions? And I would argue that it was just bad decisions. And certainly,
But isn't bad decisions mishandling? I mean, basically, doesn't that
you
indicate that it was mishandled?
A bad decision is not necessarily mishandling. Okay. There are plenty of decisions that you can make that are bad that could end up being being good due to the outcome happening regardless. So no, I don't think it's mismanagement. Mismanagement would.
Would you say that they succeeded with the franchise? So if we say, let's say it wasn't mishandled. So let's say it was handled properly. So what are the indicators that would say it was handled properly? It had great box office numbers. The fans are super happy. The story makes sense and everybody had a good time. Is there an argument that that's the case, or would we say that the overwhelming majority of people would say it was mishandled?
Well, I would argue is that look at it from Disney's point of view, is that expanding the fan base from their original target audience of males who are in their 40s or 50s to younger audiences, to female audiences, to China, which is not normally or overseas audiences, I should say, to expand Star Wars. Would that be a good decision or a bad decision? Because what they're doing, while maybe not being necessarily successful, they are trying to bring Star Wars to a more wider audience.
But if it's not Star Wars done properly, then is it Star Wars?
I would argue. Well, I mean that's part of the gag is what is Star Wars? Because I'll be honest, even Lucas with the prequels had trouble of defining what is Star Wars, because he made the Jedi's just a bunch of people wielding lightsabers, and that's not necessarily what Star Wars is at least from the original trilogy.
Yes.
So
we had Han Solo in the first Star Wars say that being a Jedi was being part of a hokey religion, and where was the religion in the prequels? I didn't see any. So what is Star Wars is a legitimate question. And one of the ways that you have to answer that question has nothing to do with Disney.
Well, George, I think, gets to define it, right,
I
Father?
don't think they're Star Wars. I mean, I don't think you'd find anybody who would say that the Christmas special should, be Star Wars.
Well, George would like to destroy it as well. What did he say? He'd love to go around if he had the time or the money and destroy every copy of the special.
On the point of negligence and mismanagement, I think I have at least one main exhibit leading into others to add here to this, if you will, Alan. Basically, that is Kathleen Kennedy herself is generally out of the loop, it seems, and she's supposed to be the head of Lucasfilm and the producer of these movies. And there was a time where she didn't even know anything about the whole Carrie Fisher business in episode 9, and Carrie Fisher's brother even had to correct her on it. I mean, so that tells me she's not even paying attention to what she's supposed to be paying attention to. On top of, let's jump ahead to another point where Miss Kennedy wasn't very observant of what was going on. She let an Obi-Wan Kenobi show go to the point where they had to rewrite it because it was too much like a show they already had in Mandalorian. I mean, to me, that is just gross negligence at this point. You have the person who's supposed to be in charge of this thing who can't even keep track of anything and doesn't even know what's going on half the time, it seems like.
Well, I would argue is which unfortunately the article doesn't point out, and unfortunately we may never actually know, is how exactly was the Obi-Wan series like The Mandalorian. And
it says in there that it was like the Cub and Lone Wolf aspect.
Cub and Lone Wolf aspect, and I mean you look at the Obi-Wan series, and you can kind of and fans understandably railed against the fact that, like, oh wait, why isn't he watching Luke Skywalker, which was his whole point of being on Tatooine. So I mean, they, in kind of excising that part and trying to make that part different from Mandalorian, they ended up making something that the fans hate. I would argue maybe that it depends on what the script says and how the story went out, of how much similar or dissimilar, or maybe, who knows, maybe they should have just ran with it anyway, even if it was similar to Mandalorian aspect anyway. It's kind of hard to say without being either in the room or having the scripts on hand, to be like we got with Duel of the Fates, the episode 9. So I mean, it's part of the problem. I mean, that's also part of the problem with, like, how you said, how you had earlier, the people that Kathleen Kennedy fired. I mean, exactly what were their stories and treatments like? Could it be that the Star Wars we got was the best that they were able to get because the talent pool was maybe not up to snuff?
I can't believe turning Obi-Wan Kenobi into the Reva television show is the best that they can do. You know, and I will venture that there's people sitting here in this audience who could walk into a writer's room and produce better product than came out of that Obi-Wan series. So I don't know if that's a good argument that there's not the talent available. Is there the desire to give the fandom what it is that they want? And have they yet figured out that they don't have an endless supply of money to which pull from? And at some point, there's going to be a reckoning for what they've decided to do.
Let's for a moment. There's a lot of people that have sent super chats, and on some comments. I'd like to get to those, but real briefly, I think it's important that we, no matter where you stand on either side of the argument, I know we all love Han Solo. So, in memoriam to the character of Han Solo. Not a very respectful way of putting that, but let's move to your comment. That's I know the reference, Mr. Connors. Comments are too tired for two. Says Sims 4-pack Journey to Batuu, also distrial based, Disney trilogy based. I think is what that means. I thought Disney trilogy based. So there you go. There's a Sims 4-pack. MK Solid 82 for $4.99. Mr. Gore, the defense would like to submit lewd Polaroids of Mr. Alan Ing as evidence. Well, there you are. Gordon Kavanaugh.
It's irrelevant.
Gordon Kavanaugh for 11. Since products were brought to market that were purchased and made profits, is that not evidence in itself to dismiss charges of negligence and mismanagement? Star Wars is not dead, says Dr. Gordo, PhD. Hayden, 75 for 10. Father, as noble as your thought on Star Wars is, Disney Lucasfilm won't listen to the audience. They don't care about the thing we love. They want to make it their own, and they don't care about us. Father, would you like to address that at all?
Then we continue to love what we love. And for those of us who are creatives, to make stuff that is Star Wars, that is successful, that forces Disney or whoever owns the IP to make changes. The fans have done it before, and we can do it again.
Let's see. George Cyphers for 5. I am moved by the defense's argument, but to me it is dead. No money will be spent on new Star Wars content. I feel only scorn for the recent material. And Scott McKenzie for 10 says, officially, everything in the Star Wars publishing universe is canon, though George Lucas retains creator privileges to override anything he wants. Lucasfilm employs a keeper of the holocron. Interesting. Hayden, 75 for 10. The argument hasn't been intended malice. Disney doesn't understand Star Wars. They don't understand the fans, and they don't care. They want it to be theirs. If they cared, they wouldn't turn comments off. Jeffrey Hallam for $4.99. Murder requires malice aforethought. Disney's actions individually do not demonstrate malice. Multiple actions in totality do demonstrate malice. And Cyber Skull Media for 5, evidence of mismanagement, making a theme park and catering only to the sequels instead of evenly to all 3 trilogies.
I'd like to make a rebuttal to that, Mr.
Please,
Gore, if that's
please,
all right.
Yes, of course.
So the thing is that you got to understand, when they were developing the park, that was around when The Force Awakens came out, and that made over $2 billion. So the idea of them trying to appeal to new fans or younger fans versus the older, expanding their audience, that makes some business sense.
Then why do the Star Cruiser that you have to shut down a year after its opening?
That would be negligence.
No, I think it would be basically is that you can, as a creator, you can make everything as best as you can, but you still are kind of up to the whims of the audience on whether they accept it or not. And I think it's just the audience just didn't accept it. I think.
Yeah, but
they had to know
marketing
that,
and the key to descriptions. The key to marketing and the key to these business decisions is an understanding of the market, of the fans. And when you don't placate to the fans and give them what they want, they will not in turn give you their money. And I think that was the problem with Galaxy's Edge.
So,
who says
it was just them not.
Well,
it was just not
I want just a couple quick things. Butterbiscuit 92 for 10 says Star Wars lost $1 billion between the 3 films, almost half its audience gone. That's fans speaking with their wallets. That's Disney's own hubris because they still haven't changed. We ran a poll during the proceedings, and here are the results of the poll this week. Who do you think was the most convincing today? Prosecution 87%, defense 12%, with 382 total votes in the poll. That's actually the prosecution did better this week than last week. So I by more than 10%, if I recall correctly.
We'll make sure we let Rob know that. Thank you. Your Honor.
Yes, we'll let Rob
I've been
know.
told I should be a lawyer, so that might be one of the reasons.
Well, you're certainly dressed like one today, Tom. Some other comments here.
I like to argue.
I will say our audience is the most balanced and unbiased audience there is. And so I believe these results emphatically.
Sure, Mr. Ring. Butterbiscuit 92 goes on to say, I forgot. Solo lost money. Continuing to do the same thing, expecting a different result is insanity. And at that point, negligence. Arthur Brown for 2 says, the parks and Star Cruiser had other issues. Some other comments here. Sifax says, nah, Star Wars is dead. If they release a new one, people will see it in hopes of a resurrection, but that doesn't mean it will be revitalized. Georgie Girl, who has been on fire all day in the chat, says, I can speak for the EU fandom as a community. Most of them have left and are working hard on their EU collections. True love for the franchise is alive and well in that community. And Georgia Girl goes on to say, defending the undefendable, I admire the attempt, gentlemen. So respect.
But somebody had to do it.
Yeah.
Respect for the defense. Donnie Pearson says, speaking of Star Wars, tomorrow, May 25th, marks the real Star Wars Day. I plan to rewatch A New Hope on Disney Plus, even though it's my number 2 golden age and overall Star Wars movie behind Empire. That's right. May 25th, 1977 is when the original Star Wars movie came out. Tomorrow is the real Star Wars Day, not May the 4th. Script Doctor says, while I agree that Disney has damaged Star Wars, the charges of murder have yet to be proven, as a pivotal part of a murder charge is intent. Can the prosecution prove Disney wanted this outcome? There will be.
Well, I think I made my point earlier a little bit, at least I tried to anyway, with the whole idea that the fact that they went away from Lucas's original vision, they intended to alienate the older audience by bringing in these new people, because the way Kathleen Kennedy in her old words said it, we don't need 50-year-old fans. And at that point, I think it's a little hard to step away from. There was some intent there to destroy what came before. It's even said in The Last Jedi, kill it if you have to.
GJJ for 5. Why cater to the new young fans when the old fans will be paying for it? It's like
Amen.
The reverse of Social Security.
If I may,
yeah, Mr. Willie, yeah.
That's a traditional That's actually traditional marketing, is to cater to new fans because to younger people, because they have more disposable income than people who are older. Since people who are older tend to have college debt and mortgages, all that jazz. So that's standard marketing procedure.
The problem is marketing's wrong
always
now.
Broke.
But yeah, and also, all my kids still live at home, and they're in their 20s.
Exactly.
So, I'm still paying for everything.
Yeah.
Daniel for 550 says they had more believable, strong female characters in the EU already. Mara Jade Skywalker, etc. And they simply tossed it all out. Now we'll be moving to final thoughts, final arguments as we wrap things up for today. From the prosecution, from the defense. Your final, just bring it all home. Bottom line, your last chance to yell at each other.
I think the defense has done a good job today, and I got to tell you, I think the first thing I said when I was put on the prosecution was, I feel very bad for the defense on this one. So I respect everybody's opinions here today, and I do want to say though that I do think that we've proven without a shadow of a doubt that there has been mishandled. I think my esteemed colleague, Mr. Connors, has done a great job today, pointing out multiple things that would indicate that that Disney has mishandled the franchise at the very least. Even if we can't prove murder at this point, we can prove that there has been a mishandling of the franchise.
Gross negligence, yes.
Gross negligence, a desire to abandon legacy fans, and just I would call it an overall lack of awareness of what is right. And maybe a little bit of idiocy as well in decision making. So,
and I think in abandoning the fans, that's no different than, say, if you were to, starve somebody to death. It's still murder at the end of the day. You're starving a franchise of its core nourishment.
Well said.
And you may not necessarily have intended to kill it, but at the end of the day, your gross negligence did kill it. And that would be of Rian Johnson, Disney, Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, and the rest of the bunch.
Bob Iger.
Bob Iger.
Quick super chat here from Arthur Brown for 5 says, if you cater to new fans but scorn the old fans, you will damage the franchise. Just look at Halo going from Xbox's #1 to not even in the top 20. So there you go. Anyone else before we a few more comments here I want to get in, and then we'll wrap it up for the this session of court for the day.
Yes, I'd like to say is that with my point, going to my point is that George Lucas was the creator of Star Wars, and he was playing it by ear, and he managed to be lucky to make a successful franchise. Disney, having bought Star Wars, was now the de facto creator of Star Wars, for the upcoming for foreseeable future. That's what I was trying to say. So them kind of playing it a little bit by ear and letting the creatives be creatives is a risk, not necessarily to the for their how well they succeeded in that risk. That's up for debate, and that's taste is subjective, but they made a calculated risk, and that's my point, and that's my point.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Charlie Day. I mean, Willie. Someone called you Charlie Day.
Yeah, I know. I'm not. It's not the first time I've heard that.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Not a bad thing. So a couple more things here. I'd like to thank our mods today. Lord Thoth, Greterin Masters, Latino Slant, Paulie from Latino Slant, and Mexican Iron Man. Thank you to our mods. keeping the jury polite. Toxic Dust 13 says, I'd love for Nick Rekieta, Joe Goodlogic, and Andrew Legal Mindset to show up to get in on this. There are going to be some shocking guests that will be joining in the coming weeks for Critics Court. Court, if we go by all the counts, will run through the beginning of San Diego Comic-Con, the third week of July, when we will render a verdict. That may, in fact, happen live at San Diego Comic-Con in San Diego. We will keep you up to date on that. Also want to thank Mr. Todd Blackwood today, our court sketch artist. Thank you, sir, for your renderings. We have Darth Vader there. I saw earlier a sketch of Vader. I saw a sketch of Mickey Mouse. Please follow Mr. Blackwood on social media. Links are in the description, and you can go to @Blackwood_PDX. That's well, there you are, Charlie Day. There you go.
I think that's supposed to be Ryan Johnson.
Oh, Ryan Johnson. Sort of an
That's
amalgam.
Ryan Johnson, yeah.
A little bit of an amalgam there.
That's great.
So there you go. Thank you. Would anyone else, thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Anyone else like to throw in a plug for your upcoming projects and events?
All I can say is, come over, check out the Popcast Unleashed every Thursday and Monday. We have Raw Rant, which, our judge has been on the show several times. We appreciate him. And just thanks for having us on today, and appreciate giving us an opportunity to fight for Star Wars.
I just want to tell everybody you can find me at Midnight's Edge After Dark. But if you expect me to be like this over there, you're going to be sadly mistaken. Because
oh, and I want to remind people, if you
this
go to
is an act. I'm just a Southern lawyer.
If you go to the Film Threat YouTube channel, we've been running these caption contests. I think you will be incredibly amused if you go to the community tab on the Film Threat YouTube channel. There is a beautiful rendering of Kathleen Kennedy by Mr. Blackwood, and the captions I did lol several times. So we've been posting some of Todd's artwork.
Warn me next time.
Yeah, Father Dave, any would you like to plug your project?
Nothing to plug, but I do want to thank everybody for doing this. This is fun. I think it's also necessary. I think the fact that we're able to get together and have these kinds of discussions is important, because it shows, in fact, that the fandom is alive and well, and we are not allowing any entity to divide us in our love of Star Wars. So thanks everybody who is here, and everybody who has been commenting, and everybody who has participated. You're great. God bless.
Thank you, Father. Willie.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to echo Father Dave's sentiments by thanking Film Threat for having me on. Thank you for the audience for putting in their thoughts. And for me, on my channel, I'm working on making Assault, an animated pilot for Assault on Castle Dracula. It's part 2 of the pilot, and I'm working on some other shorts as well, since I'm ADD and nuts and like to give myself a lot of work. And you can also find me on Willie the Monkey King's music channel. I got some music that I made, and even some live stream, even some videos going through songs that I had created, but for one reason or another, just didn't seem to be to the light of day to put on a video.
Mr. Ng.
Yes, join us for the live stream on Friday. We'll be talking about The Little Mermaid and asking the question, is Walt Disney Company murdering itself?
I am Judge Chris Gore. Some call me Frank Gore, but thank you to everyone. We'll be back next week with Critics Court, same time, 1 p.m. Pacific time. You are the jury. Join us on Critics Court, Star Wars on Trial. Thank you so much for your attendance in court today. I want to thank the members of the defense and the prosecution, our court sketch artists. All the links are in the description of this episode, including a link to all the charges. We will continue case number 1138. Thank you all.